Thank you very much for that intro, Courtney. That was awesome. I do like to write my talks and title them in this sort of like movie theme. So I was like, oh my God, someone totally undressed me. But what I want to do is, actually, for the few of you who are here during the last like 5 minutes, a FaceTime call came in, and the AV person was like, is that your dad and mom? Because it said like papi and mommy, and I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to take it. He's like, no, take it. So I took the FaceTime call, and that's why I did one of these. And my dad's like, where are you? I'm like, I'm in Barca, Dad. And he was like, okay, call me back. What I do want to do, though, is I just want to take, this is the last talk of the day, and I've had a pleasant time, actually an incredible time watching all the other talks, but the crowd has been amazing. This beautiful venue, I think, is like fantastic. I just want to take one group selfie. Can we do that? We good? Okay. I'm going to turn around, take the selfie. You just got to throw your hands up in 3, 2, 1. Yeah, okay, maybe I should be in the photo. There we go. I'm bad at selfies. I don't know how to do this. Okay, it's all good. All right, we're going to get cracking. So, this is a picture of me. You're going to see this on my Twitter. If you do, check me out. But I just want to say, I guess it was Vladimir who had that talk when he was talking about all the libraries that he writes and on and on and on. And I was downstairs, like, absolutely embarrassed because I don't write libraries. And I was telling them, I'm like, man, I go to libraries. And this is a picture of me at the library because I knew I had one somewhere. And I just want to throw that up and just have fun. Anyhow, I'm glad to be back in Barcelona. I'd been here about, I think, 10 years ago. Vlad, I see you right there. Shout out. I'd been here about 10 years ago, and I was in a different industry at the time. I went to this thing called bread and butter. Is anyone familiar with bread and butter? Yeah, kind of. It's like a fashion thing. I used to work in fashion. But I came back the year after because I loved Barca so much. I went to Sonar. And Sonar is actually taking place right now. Also used to work in music. And friends of mine actually messaged me because they found out that I was in Barca, and they're like, yo, you should come check us out at Sonar. I'm like, I'm going to try. But the reason I had a fantastic time in Sonar when I came down is I got to see Grace Jones. And I was a big fan of hers, and I couldn't believe that I was going to be at Sonar and seeing Grace Jones. It was like a beautiful night, and we had a great time. Anyhow, let's get going. My name is Henri, absolutely. My surname is not Helvetica. It's something I thought that was kind of neat for a Twitter handle, but I started to use it as a speaker name for various reasons. I could tell you if you want after. But I'm there on Twitter. You could also find me on Instagram at that as well. And I am from the wonderful city of Toronto, Canada, home of the world champ Toronto Raptors. Okay. That's what I needed to hear. Home of Marc Gasol, who's also from Barcelona. Let's go. I mean, it's a hometown hero. You got to give him some love. So, we're going to get going. We're going to talk about my talk, I guess, which is called The Shape of the Web. It's a talk about the technology that we love and the technologists that we also work with. So we're going to get cracking. First of all, I want to thank JSCamp. It's been a fantastic event. The people have been amazing. My hotel is fantastic. I mean, give it up for JSCamp, please. It's been 2 beautiful days. Can we get an applause for them? I definitely appreciate the community work. It's a labor of love, and I think we have to show that love back because I think it's fantastic what they've been able to do. So let's talk about the web. The web's about 30 years, more or less, depending how you count. And I was thinking to myself, like, okay, 30 years has been a while, but what was happening, say, 30 years ago? Well, 30 years ago, you had people like Madonna on the charts. You know, I was a big fan of this song she had called Lucky Star. Would you believe that 30 years ago is when The Simpsons started? which is actually kind of wild. And speaking of music, sonar, and more charts, 30 years ago, we also had a band called Milli Vanilli. I know, right? They had multiple hits, believe it or not, before their career hit rock bottom, basically. But I do know what I was doing not 30 years ago, but somewhere around there. I was probably at a computer store and staring through the glass, trying to see if I could afford this modem. And when we're talking about the web back then, we used to access the web with devices like these. Who had one of these modems out there? Okay, well, we're all family right now. And that was a 14.4, and that was not fast at all. But it was pretty awesome because it allowed you to access the web. You just plugged it, or if you had an internal one, you just dropped it in the back, and then you did things like check out newsgroups. Now, for those who don't remember newsgroups, they're like the original meetup.com. Like, you could just go hang out with people you didn't know, and you would just talk about things that you all liked. I used to hang out in this one little news group called rec.music.hiphop, and I used to trade music with people, like physically trade music, like mail cassette tapes and get cassette tapes back in the mail. Like, how crazy is that? But then I stayed online quite often, and I did things like search on Alta Vista, for those who remember that. It was my favorite search engine, even though I think Google came afterwards, but I kind of stuck around Alta Vista, but I was definitely heartbroken when it left. But things got really interesting when browsers came around, and I was a big Netscape Navigator fan. And Mark Andreessen, obviously, and his team put that out, and it was like a window to the world. Now, here's a little tidbit of historical information. Mark Andreessen was actually hired when he was in school by this woman who was like, you should get into maybe this browser thing going on. And he was like, what's a browser? And she basically introduced him to the whole process, and things changed dramatically after that. Just a little tidbit of history. But once he did get going, he knew that he was onto something, and something very big. And he said that this software is going to change everything, which, it might have been sort of hubris at the time, but it was very much something that did change the world, in fact. And speaking of Netscape, this is actually Netscape 9. It's a screenshot from yesterday. You could actually still run it. I actually loaded up a site called light.cnn.io, which is basically just text and not much JavaScript, if anything at all, and it loads actually perfectly, if you want to try it out, in case you don't believe me. But furthering that, another very influential person in Silicon Valley at the time, her name's Kim Polisi, who said things started exploding with the invention of the browser because suddenly the internet was accessible to the average person, which was absolutely true. If you had a desktop computer modem, you could actually start to browse the net comfortably. And this is something that a lot of people start to do at that point. Because when Netscape dropped, they had 65 million users in 18 months. And that was a rate of adoption that had not been seen before in software in general. In fact, word was that Microsoft was fairly jealous at the time. But it was very important because the Netscape browser allowed people to sort of read information comfortably because the text was laid out, the images were there, and it felt like reading, say, the paper on a computer. And speaking of images, believe it or not, there was a point in time where they weren't too sure if they were going to allow images onto the net because history has it, or folklore has it, that they were scared that the internet would get overrun with pornography. And we all know what happened after that. But more importantly, and this is also factual, is that Mark believed, Mr. Andreessen believed, I don't want to call him Mark like we're boys, but Mr. Andreessen believed that bringing images onto the net and the risk of having some cowboys, we'll say, bring craziness to the net through images would push the web forward. The experimentation is what they felt was a willing risk. And in fact, it was a great decision. Because we all know images have become very important to the net, and its management also become very important. Shout outs to Cloud and Airy in the building. Nonetheless, that was then, and now today, what do we have? We have 4.4 billion users of the web online, which is incredible. And you might think to yourself, like, man, that's an explosive growth. What may have ushered that growth? Well, if you look at this photo, you'll see exactly what's going on. I think this speaks volumes of what the internet has created. Engagement, even from the people who are not supposed to be technology inclined, the Amish community. We have mobile devices hitting all corners of the globe right now. And the mobile device is what exactly has basically created this penetration. Because you have, we'll say, moderately priced devices that are a bit more accessible to parts of the world that may not have the disposable income, say, like we do in the West. But they're able to get online, and that's very key. So this is the device that essentially has created all that excitement, all that engagement by people who previously were not able to get online. And really and truly, think about this. This is the device they were introduced the web to, and this is quite often the device that they'll only know in their web lifetime. So what has this allowed us to do, being online all the time with devices like these? Well, we can basically do everything. Like, there's almost nothing we can't do online right now. We can make money. We can manage money online. We can go on a date, find a date, buy clothes for the date online. We could try to manage and reach our fitness goals. We can watch Messi score goals, right? Okay, he plays here, right? Yeah, I thought so. I mean, he doesn't have fans in the room, I guess? I don't know, I'm just checking. But we can watch Messi score goals, and we could also watch Messi get old now. Has anyone used this face app thing? You could admit it, because I haven't, I know. Black don't crack anyways. But the important part is that developers and engineers have been doing a lot of work to make sure that there isn't much friction on the web. Mobile devices, we know, aren't like, the most powered devices out there, so we do have to put all this work in. And we've been working overtime. And I don't know if you remember yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, during the keynote, Kyle Simpson talked about, what was it, this kind of slider, this fidelity slider he talked about for the users. Well, I mean, we have things like that already. I mean, who's used the Network Information API at all? I mean, these are APIs, that's an API you can use to sort of like manage some of the resources depending on like the device and connectivity that the user has at the time. Garance earlier today talked about some of the accessibility features, or at least how to create really nice accessibility menus so that people can comfortably use them who need them. By the way, when it comes to accessibility, you don't need to have a disability to use accessibility features. I myself love to use VoiceOver when reading blog posts or articles. Because I can. Something to think about. And you could actually also do music in the browser. Does anyone here follow Ken Wheeler? Yeah, a few of you. If you don't, you should check it out. He's a React guy, but he does music in the browser. He does beats. He actually used to rap and produce, like for real, for real. But ultimately, this is the technology at work. We've seen all this technology in the browser enable us to do several things. Like, I could have gone through a myriad of items. But we're also going to talk about the technologies. And this is where it gets a little bit challenging, unfortunately. And this is how my talk started to develop, because I'm like, man, I love the technology, but we are not doing enough potentially for the technologists. And we're going to start to talk about women in technology. This is something that's kind of dear to me because I started to think about this actually when I still worked in music. And I'll tell you why in a hot second. You could actually just go on Twitter for a few moments, and some of the rancor online around women in technology and the abuses they go through hits you in like, pow, like very quickly. And I think it's very unfortunate. What do they talk about? Several things. We're going to go through a few right now. Things like, working in tech, but for them, lack of career growth. The salary issues. We know it's always like this big shroud around salary. It's smoky rooms. It's like, what are you making? I don't know. Poor management. Challenges there. And the last part I left other, that's the part you don't always want to talk about, but those are the weird DMs that come in, ladies' DMs on Twitter or Instagram, photos, NSFW. And I think that's very unfortunate. And I used to think about this all the time because in my day in music, I remember I'd sort of felt a little bit of that same kind of like rancor taking place. And I actually tried about 10 years ago to do a stage show, music event, concert with a female lineup, all female. Didn't work out like I wanted to, but I kept plugging away. And at the time, I was a writer as well, and I had this very, I'm not going to brag, but I had a pretty successful blog. And I did a 1 week special of like female producers straight up and down. And I remember my analytics shot through the roof. I didn't know what happened, but I never forgot that. So a few years ago when I got together with some buddies and I joined this meetup group, and I was like, man, this is what I have in mind. And I always wanted to recreate or try once again to have that sort of like event where I can celebrate women, their accomplishments, X, Y, and Z. And we sat down, we figured it out, and I'm the type of person to sort of jump with no net and just say, let's do it. And so we did. So every year on International Women's Day, I reach out to some developers, some engineers that I know, and I invite them to Toronto to speak to other women who are trying to get their career going in technology. I've been doing this for 5 years, and this is, I think, 2017. But this is one of the ones I'm most proud of because I'm going to read them. I mean, from right to left, we have Lena Söderberg, who used to work at the White House. She was an Obama hire. In the middle, we have Tammy Everts. She works in performance, someone I look up to dearly. I used to read all her blog posts when she worked at Radware and thereafter. And on the left, you may know Mina Markham. She worked for Hillary Rodham Clinton on her campaign. And it was fantastic having them all three at the event. This is, again, 2017, but our event has grown since then. This is probably about like 300 and change there. But the point is, it was awesome to see people come in and sort of like celebrate all together, all in one cause. Why do I like to see these things? Because I also like to see moments like these. You may remember on the left, that's Kitty Booman, who led the team of engineers and scientists to recreate a picture of the black hole, which happened earlier this year. Does anyone remember that? Obviously, it made some news. If you don't, go check it out. It's all over. And on the right, we have Margaret Hamilton. Obviously, a little older photo, but she was the lead engineer, team lead of engineers for the Apollo missions back in the day. And including Apollo 11, which celebrates 50 years. That's the mission that took the gentleman to the moon. I love these moments. And it might be because I come from a family of educators. My parents were teachers. And they just taught me how to, like, hey, get the best out of people when you can. But I love this photo the most. Why do I like this? Well, as you can see, these are women celebrating some kind of a victory, some kind of event, or at least a team of people. Well, this was the Indian Space Research Organization. And they had just celebrated a Mars mission where basically they had a satellite circle Mars and come back. Now, no big deal. They were like the 4th team to ever do it. But they were the first to do it on the first try ever. And yeah, it was a fantastic moment. There's actually a little documentary on that. I'll be able to tweet out the link. The best part is they all worked in computer science. You know, Katie Booman, Margaret Hamilton, and the women right there. Which brings me to the next little malaise that we have, I feel, in tech right now. The computer science versus non-computer science arguments. How did that start? Suddenly people in STEM are like battling. Any CS people in here? I mean, raise your hand, like I got love for you. All right, don't be shy. All good. CS, non-CS, it's all good. We're all working together. But I find this argument a little bizarre. And it really kind of hit me when I saw this tweet. Now, the tweet reads the following. Reasons why computer science degree is a bad idea. Whoa. Money, apparently costs too much money. Apparently it's too much time. And apparently CS is very boring. Not always, but it definitely can be. Well, that's like any job, really. And he goes on to say, I'm not anti-CS degree, but I'm not pro either. And that really bothered me because this is someone with fairly, large influence on social media. And I'm thinking to myself, anyone who works on the web right now is working on stuff that was created by CS. I mean, I think it's very bizarre. The web operates beautifully with compression, and compression is the product of CS. No big deal, but that's what it is. But then this came out because, these arguments kept going on, and Brian from Brooklyn JS wrote this. Be careful not to say nobody needs a CS degree or CS degrees are bad, when you really mean, I have not found myself at a disadvantage for the things I've wanted to accomplish in life by not having a CS degree. And that's totally true. It's about a collaborative environment. That's it. CS people, non-CS people work together to get the product out for the customers, as Mr. Simpson said yesterday. Who remembers this? Yeah, a couple of Commodore 64 fans. I had one. Now, raise your hand if you know what this means. I didn't think so. DOPE stands for Dartmouth Oversimplified Programming Experiment. You probably never heard of it because it was a failed language, but it became this. Who remembers BASIC? DOPE became BASIC, Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code. The inventor of BASIC, John Kennedy, was a STEM professor, mathematics, but he believed that he could get non-STEM people to embrace programming. So he worked on it. And eventually BASIC came out, and BASIC was the collaborative effort of non-STEM students, mostly, and STEM people on the campus of Dartmouth University. I'm saying this simply because I want to convey that the web, the future of the web, is going to be collaborative. It's going to be a lot of CS people working with non-CS people, whether you know it or not. But once again, the product to the customer is going to be the best it can be by having that happen. I'm going to skip this slide because I could talk forever about this, but I just want to say that the InSight project to Mars, again, a collaborative effort. And John Kennedy's daughter once said that the B.A.S.I.C project, it was seen as what many will now call an aligned team. Now, I have a few minutes left, but since we're talking about CS, I want to talk about a more interesting and potentially pressing moment. I'm going to assume no one knows who this is, but her name is Lena Söderberg. That may ring a bell, but this may ring more of a bell for especially the performance people out here. She went by Lena, but if you don't recognize that, you may recognize this. Does anyone recognize this photo? Okay, so this is a photo that essentially has become the test image for any kind of image processing. If you want to talk about compression or like signal this or SSIM, like whatever it is, quite often her photo will come up. And I remember thinking to myself, because I'm a big performance person, like, okay, I did a little bit of digging around, I like history. And I found out where the photo came from. And the photo originated from this. And I thought that was a little bizarre. And I thought, like, how did this happen? Someone who was presenting at a conference one day, much like this, was bored with their set of photos. They did, want to present the same photos over and over again. So they picked up a magazine that was laying around that happened to be a Playboy, and they just tore out parts of the centerfold, and this became the de facto image for testing. And I thought that was a little strange because we're talking about 40 years later, today, 40 and change, we're still using that photo. And I'm thinking, like, how? There are 2 billion photos updated to the web every day, but somehow we're hanging on to a photo of a centerfold. And at the same time, we're trying to hang on to female talent. How does that work? And last year, yes, last year, someone who presented a talk, how does it go? Third keynote, his Playboy research on female breast sizes, where he looked at breast sizes, sexual arousing, and other variables in 683 centerfolds. That's a lot of centerfolds. Like, he's got time on his hands. In fact, he might be blind. I'll just leave it at that. So my point is this. If we are really trying to be a better community, hang on to better talent, what are we doing still presenting stuff like this at a conference? I don't think this is the shape of the web to come. Let's fly through a few things here. We know what that means, World Wide Web. Bruce Lawson, a great developer, would call it the wealthy Western web. And he would often complain about how, we take things for granted in the West. And I want to talk about this real quickly. This is the number of internet users worldwide right now in descending order. So China, India, USA, Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, Nigeria, Russia, Bangladesh, Mexico. Now, the greatest growth is happening in these countries right here: Bangladesh, Nigeria, Vietnam, Iran, India, Egypt, Indonesia, China, Russia, Turkey. This is why documentation is going to be extremely important. If you have a product coming out, if you have a framework that you're releasing, and you want its adoption to grow, documentation is going to be extremely important in this case. Why do I bring this up? Earlier this year, or late last year, there was a little kerfuffle online, and someone said, documentation in anything but the English language is useless, or at least we don't need it. How is that possible? If you want your framework to be adopted quickly, you're going to have not only good documentation, you're going to make some efforts to have this documentation in different languages. And it leads me to this moment right here, and the lights just went out. I don't know what's going on. Is there a club thing going here after? This young lady's an engineer at Google, and she took that thread to heart. And she was essentially saying, like, how could you not want to have English documentation, documentation outside of the English language if you want your product to grow? Because there are people who are going to eventually understand the English language, and yeah, they're going to make their way around the documentation, but rest assured the adoption is going to be a lot quicker if it's made in their native language. I spoke earlier this year in Berlin, and one of the speakers was giving a talk for the first time in English. He had given several in his native tongue. And I'm thinking to myself, man, that's amazing. And I'm imagining how quickly he could have been able to maybe give a talk in a particular, about a particular language or a framework, once again, if the documentation had been made in his native tongue. This is why I think, again, the future of the shape of the web to come is one where we're going to be a lot more inclusive and realize that there are people out there who are trying to join the ranks, but they're having friction doing so. So, 2020. We're in 2019, right? Yeah. So 2020. What is to come in 2020? Well, I'll tell you this much. In 2020, that letter that Steve Jobs wrote about Flash turns 10. Remember that. But in 2020, we have to be more inclusive. That's without a doubt. You know, we are going to have conferences like these where we're going to make the accommodations for expectant mothers or young new mothers. I saw someone with a carriage at some point, and I believe with a kid, and she had a badge. We're going to have more empathy for people who are coming in the industry, who are trying to break in. Again, I come back to the documentation. What are we doing for them to help them learn? We're going to have more community conferences like these. Paul, wherever he's at, there he is, who runs Queer.js. Let's go. He didn't mention it, but he also does some mentoring with people who want to learn how to be developers. These are very significant moments. And we're just going to have, more delightful experiences. Again, whether it be conferences, whether it be meetups, whether it be getting together, and again, just being a friendly community at the end of the day. I always talk about we have to create the delight of discovery. At the end of the day, we're all sort of little teachers. And with that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank JSCamp for having me. I want to thank everyone who's been talking to me the last few days, because I think it's been a fantastic community, and I want to wish everyone a safe ride home. Thank you.